like Sydney mentioned, right? Like as soon as women saw the Olympics really kind of becoming a thing, they said, I want to do that, right? I want to compete. I want to run. I want to play. And the men were like, oh, no. We did not account for this.
Joining us for a triumphant return visit, they're a writer, producer, and artist, and the creator and host of the fantastic audio documentary series Tested from CBC and NPR. A Peabody, Emmy, and Eisner nominee, co-founder of the Coyote Media Collective. They lift weights and make sculptures. It's Reo Eveleth.
Thanks for having me back. I wish I was here to talk about something better.
I know. Sometime we'll just have you on to shoot the shit. Yeah. Also with us, she's a journalist and communication strategist who's covered topics including sports, health, culture, and LGBTQ plus issues for outlets including Reuters, NBC News, ABC News, HuffPost, Cosmopolitan, and more. An Emory grad, rower, and cursed forever due to her New York Mets fandom. It's Sydney Bauer. Hi, Sydney.
Hey, it's April. Almost April. That's the best time to be a Mets fan.
This is I'm also a Mets fan. This is the perfect. We are riding high in Mets fandom
Both
right
of you?
now. I know. I'm so sorry. You're
sorry.
Overwhelmed now.
One of the few teams I can lord my Cubs fandom over and say it's still better over here. Very few. Well, thank you both for joining me for what's sure to be not nearly enough time to dig into all that's going on in the world of trans inclusion in sport, Olympic sex testing, and just the general decay of humanity. But we're going to do our best. I want to start with the new International Olympic Committee policy, which requires that every single woman who competes in the female category in every sport at the Games will have to undergo a one-time genetic test via saliva, cheek swab, or blood sample. The test is looking for what's called the SRY gene, typically on the Y chromosome. The IOC says that if an athlete has the SRY gene, then they're considered to have experienced male sex development and are therefore banned from the female category. So the outcome of this new policy is that all trans women will be banned from female categories. Many athletes with differences of sex development will be banned, and every single woman who wants to compete will be subjected to a test to determine if she is indeed, in the eyes of the IOC, a real woman. Of course, according to medical experts and geneticists, including the scientist who actually discovered the SRY gene, the existence of the gene proving that one has experienced male sex development and enjoys its potential benefits is far too simplistic of a take. So let's start there, Reo. Tell me what you know about this. Why do experts say that this SRY gene alone is not a reliable tool?
Yeah, so the SRY gene lives on the Y chromosome. If it is functioning normally and everything kind of goes as average, right, it then stimulates this cascade of genes that turn on, that develop testes, that then create testosterone, right? And so what the IOC is saying is that if you have this gene, then therefore you definitely have all the testosterone and your body definitely, receives it and does stuff with it. And you become this, incredibly potent potential athlete, biological male, as they like to say, which is not really a term that experts in any other field of medicine or science would use. It's sort of an invented term for this conversation. The problem is that for some people, the SRY gene doesn't work. It does work, but only kind of. It works, but the testes that don't develop properly. They do develop properly, but the body can't receive or sort of process testosterone. Sometimes it can, but only some tissues can use the testosterone and not others. Biology is really messy. This idea that there are two categories, right, male and female, just does not hold up. And so any test that tries to pin this sort of binary down is just inherently going to fail. You just cannot succeed at this task. And so they have moved towards the gene thing away from testosterone, which is what we had been talking about for the last 10 to 15 years, in part because it feels, I think, a little cleaner for people. And it feels a little more obvious in terms of, it's a genetic test, so it's got to be right. But of course, that's not, unfortunately, or fortunately, how biology works, depending on how you think about it.
Yeah, it ignores literal decades of science that have disproved the theory that it's a simple XXXY situation. So all it tells you is if the gene is present, not whether it's actually doing any of the things that the gene would do that might cause you to consider someone differently abled or potentially differently abled in sport as a result of being, quote unquote, a man. Sydney, you've covered trans athletes and the intersection of LGBTQ rights in sport for a very long time. How did it hit you when this new IOC policy was announced?
It felt inevitable. This kind of felt like something like these are all political decisions. And having covered the IOC since like London 2012, you kind of see, if you've done it for more than 10 years, you kind of see the way political winds are going, the way decisions are being queued up, the way that they work essentially is there are committees that make decisions. They have concentric rings of decisions. If you know what the inner circle is doing or what they're telegraphing, you can kind of see ahead of time what's coming down the pike. And that's where this came from.
You know, we're going to get to later how this will create circles around both Olympic participation and then going out from there all the way down to youth sports. But before we get to that, I do want to get to sort of like the specifics of how we're going to talk about who this affects. And Reo, a lot of times when we have conversations like this, they get muddied by a lack of clarity around the words that we're using. So let's ensure that everyone listening really is on the same page, starting with an explanation of the differences between DSD, intersex, and trans. Can you help with that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen so much of the coverage around this IOC ban be like, IOC bans trans athletes. And that is accurate, but sort of incomplete. So you have trans women, and specifically trans women, right? The IOC is sort of uninterested in trans men as a category. They just sort of don't really address that. Trans women, right? People who were maybe assigned male at birth and now live as women are women. And then you have this other sort of more complicated category of what the IOC and other sporting bodies call DSD athletes, differences of sex development. This is a very sort of contested term. Some athletes are fine with it. Some athletes hate it. It sort of medicalizes something that doesn't necessarily need to be medicalized. Some of these women have these sort of conditions and they would never know. They've lived their whole lives. They're fine. They don't need medical treatment or help. Some of those athletes may identify as intersex, but some of them don't. Many of them don't. Intersex is sort of more of an identity term like queer, where you kind of opt into it. You kind of choose that for yourself more and more now. And many of these athletes who are impacted by this are like, no, I'm a cis woman. I was assigned female at birth. I've lived my whole life as a woman. I am a woman. Like, there's no, like, this, all of these labels that are being applied to me kind of are against my will, frankly, and have nothing to do with my lived experience, except for when the IOC shows up and says, surprise, you don't get to be in this category anymore.
So I want to talk about that, Reo, because per the IOC, a person can have a vagina, ovaries, breasts, has lived their entire life as a female, but who is discovered to have the SRY gene, and then they say is not a biological female and is in fact a man and would compete in the male category. So can you help me understand how science categorizes the biology of folks with differences of sex development?
Oh, it's hard to answer because sort of science is this like big morass, right?
Right.
And there's different people. And, you know, one of the things I think the IOC and other governing bodies do actually a sort of nefariously good job of is saying, no, we are listening to the science, right? We are the ones who are, you know, following the science. And the science is very clear, right? Coventry says in her press conference, the science is very clear. The science is not very clear, just to make sure that that's said out loud. But if you sort of do this redefining of terms, inventing terms like biological male, and sort of every policy you'll see has this definition list at the very end where they are creating their own set of definitions that when you talk to most medical experts, most people who study this outside of the realm of sports would look at and be like, what? That's not a term we would ever use. That's not a phrase we would ever use. And I think, you know, broadly, medical science recognizes that there is a lot of variation between the sexes, right? I think more and more the general public is aware that gender is this spectrum. And in fact, even the IOC says, of course, yes, we totally understand. Gender is a spectrum. We would never, ever tell somebody what their gender is. However, we would tell someone what their sex is because that is very clear and simple and scientific. And of course, it's not, right? Science has this broad spectrum. There's a lot of really interesting medical research around this and sort of biology research around this, that just human bodies come in all sorts of configurations. And this makes sense when you think about your experience. I'm sure each person listening to this knows somebody who has kind of a weird medical thing or like a weird a body that does something kind of funky, right? Like we know this in all other contexts, but for some reason we're so locked in on sex being simple when we all know that that can't possibly be the case, but it's really hard to unlearn that, I think.
Well, and I do think people are uncomfortable with being told something that they thought they understood forever is different than what it was, especially if that means confusing gender along with sex, because we're so predisposed to assign people to a spot in society so we can, I don't know, pay them less or not elect them for president for whatever reason. But I think, Sydney, like, this is a great point. Like, if basic education around these complexities in sex and gender maybe was a little more common, we could move the needle. I mean, it's not simple, right? There's a lot of still new science coming out. Even this SRY gene was just discovered in 1990. But I feel like even just opening up conversation for, oh, it's not as simple as we used to be, could be really helpful, right?
I always like to say this is a political decision because the way they're defining new things is a political definition for things. And ultimately, you have sport, which existed for so long as just men, defined by the men in charge, can play sport, that when people fought for really hard-earned rights to get the opportunity to play alongside this, it created this new category, which is a super important fight and one that keeps happening and should never be diminished. But at the end of the day, all it did was create two categories for sport. And there are so many more categories of human existence, so many more categories of just how people fit in life. And the IOC wants to thread this needle between, this is how we organize sports. This is how people pay us a lot of money to organize sports. This is how everyone on earth tries to tune in to watch how we organize sports. So we need to fit everything into this definition because it works, because we've said it works, because you show up and you watch and you agree it works. So we have to make this work, which is why they continue to do this the way that they are, which was when they let trans women in 2003 come to the Olympics. They said, great, get your surgery, do whatever the definition of a transsexuality was back then. We will let you in. You fit into our rules. You come to play, you play by our rules. Then they realized their rules didn't work. So for 13 years, they dealt with athletes asking for more rights. They dealt with lawsuits happening behind the scenes, which is why ahead of Rio 2016, they came up with their new consensus statement, which was, as it was, a consensus statement. This wasn't something that was hard, fast, defined, A versus B, X versus Y, so on and so forth. They said, this is the best we can do to fit you guys in. And people said, great, I think we can do a little bit better. And they tried and pushed that for another 5 years and got the last framework and consensus statement, which broadened, the idea of fairness and inclusion, which is a line created by PR officials to fit into everything. And here we are. So I don't even know if more education would work. It's the IOC has a way they do things and they want to make everything fit into that box, except reality does not fit into that box.
Right. I mean, we're ultimately bumping up against sports are usually binary and human biology is not. So how do we do our best within the constraints of that reality? So Reo, we had you on back in 2024 and we talked about your fantastic show, Tested. Everyone should go listen to that episode and to Reo's podcast in general, but we'll actually link both of those in the show notes if people want to check them out, because I think they're both worth listening to. So I don't want to rehash too much of what we discussed last time, but I do want you to explain why this so-called gender testing at the Olympics isn't new and is actually a recurring sort of whack-a-mole nightmare that dates back a whole century.
Yeah, I mean, like Sydney mentioned, right? As soon as women saw the Olympics really kind of becoming a thing, they said, I want to do that, right? I want to compete, I want to run, I want to play. And the men were like, oh, no. We did not account for this. This was not something we accounted for. And they worked really hard and they succeeded, right, at getting into the Olympics. And as soon as women start competing in the Olympics, and in particular, as soon as women start competing in sports that are seen as masculine, and at the time, right, that's really track and field is seen sort of interestingly as the most masculine sport at the time. As soon as women start running on the track, you start to hear all of these questions. Is that really a woman? They can't possibly be women, because real women wouldn't want to do this. Real women would not compete like this. Real women wouldn't make these gruesome faces as they are pushing their bodies right to the brink. And so immediately you have questions. Is that a woman? Is that a woman? Is that a woman? They, of course, largely center around women who are from certain parts of the world, right? You have a Japanese runner who is immediately challenged. You have an Eastern European runner who's immediately challenged. And at the time, there's no real policy at the very beginning, because it's kind of just a little bit of backdoor. There have been these rumors. Oh, we took her to the back and checked, right? Which is what is that? I mean, when you think about that for more than a second, you're like, what does that even mean? And 1936 is the first sex testing policy, right? They have a policy as soon as 1936. And so this has been this ongoing question of, oh, these women are so masculine, they don't look right, they don't seem right. So even as, we celebrate women in sports and women's sports history, and look how these great trailblazers, and now, right, the IOC looks back and celebrates these women, even though at the time they were policing them, and they continue to police them to this day, right? And so it's just this ongoing question of trying to find the thing that divides those two categories. And the sort of target is always slightly moving, but the underlying question is the same. As you say, we have organized sports in a binary way. Human bodies do not fit that. There's always going to be somebody stuck in the middle, and those people always suffer. And that's just the pattern we see over and over again.
And we've seen plenty of examples of people who do fit in the binary and are still accused of not fitting because of societal expectations for women, what they should look like, how they should behave, and how they should perform. And we are constantly capping female excellence while marveling at male excellence as we continue to expand the record books for them, which is obviously always a part of this conversation too. So after 30 years of folks in science and medicine pushing back, finally in 1999, sex testing ends at the Olympics. We get about a decade of peace-ish. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't this bad. Along comes Caster Semenya, South African middle distance runner who wins the 2009 World Championships and reignites these conversations about regulating women's bodies and pointing and saying that's not a woman. This time it comes about in the form of testosterone testing. So Reo, this new sex testing is intended to ensure that, as the policy says, quote, eligibility for any female category is limited to biological females. They used to say that was based on testosterone. Now they're telling us it's the SRY gene. Goodness, how did we get back to this after years of deciding this wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. One, testosterone was always going to be a really difficult moving target, right? What is the upper cap? How much testosterone is someone allowed to have, right? You have these women like Christine Boma, like, Caster Semenya, who have naturally higher levels of testosterone, but then you end up backing yourself into a corner if you are the IOC or World Athletics or any of these governing bodies where you have to define like how much testosterone a woman is allowed to have. And that's just like a really tricky position to put yourself in. And it also means that if you do that, which some places did, like World Athletics, you then say to athletes, okay, if you want to compete in the women's category, you have to take medication to change your biology, right? And to suppress the testosterone. And some athletes did, right? Christine Boma did that. There are other athletes who did that. They said, look, I want to compete. If this is what I have to do to compete, I will take these drugs. I will suffer the side effects. I will do it. And so that opens, I think, up a real big question around medical ethics and asking these women to medicate themselves, take medicine they do not need, and that is in fact medically like dangerous for them just because they want to compete in the Olympics, not because they have gender dysphoria, not because they have any medical reason to do so, purely to compete. And that is a legally precarious and ethically precarious place to be. And so I think that one of the reasons they've moved to genetic screening is that it takes away some of that murkiness. And I think there are people, again, it just feels clean to people. Yes, XXXY. I learned that in high school biology. Right. Bing, bang, boom. We're done here. I don't have to think more about it. Let's move on.
Yeah, and you've been in contact with the athletes that you talked about for tested, several DSD athletes in particular, who not only had life-altering and health-altering hormone therapies, but also invasive surgeries, one of whom didn't know when she said yes that she would be getting actual surgery in order to comply with those testosterone tests. Now, all for naught, right?
Yeah.
None of them will be able to compete.
Yeah, it's over for them. This is it. Yeah.
After all that, saving up the money for it, going through the physical and mental challenges of doing that. And then now they've just changed the rule and they're not able to compete because they have a gene that, according to the guy who discovered it, doesn't necessarily mean anything about how they're competing. And what's fascinating is how many other athletes, as to this point, might have also had that gene, but just been an average competitor, not good enough for anyone to point to or notice, who might now test with this new policy and discover and be eliminated. And won't that be interesting when they discover that it's not the very, very best who are getting an advantage? It's just everyone across all parts of sport, just like women can be good and not so good. And
we know this happens, right? We know this happens because from the 60s through the 90s, they did a test like this. And every Olympic Games, about 8-ish, 6 to 10 women would show up to the games, get tested and be told, surprise, you have Y chromosomal material in your cells. You have to leave. You cannot compete. Yeah. And we know that those athletes, we have I mean, we don't know all of them. A lot of the time it was quiet. They were told to fake an injury. Some of them literally put on a fake cast to try to like not make it clear, because otherwise why else are you leaving?
Yeah. Right.
And so we don't know all of them, but we do know some of their names, and we know that they were not dominant in their field. Like they made it to the Olympics, right? They are incredible athletes, but these are not people who are sweeping the podium, right? It is not always the case. And even in the case of Castor and others, there is no woman in this sort of DSD category right now who holds a world record at all. Castor does not have the world record. People speak about her as if she's this like incredible, unbeatable athlete. She doesn't even have the world record for her distances. Like, I don't know. It makes me insane.
Yeah, no. And speaking of Castor, Castor took medication for years. And one thing that she writes about in her book, The Race to Be Myself, is that she learned that she was born with DSD in the media at the same time as the public did. And critics have raised privacy concerns about the IOC's new policy. I just said there are plenty of women across plenty of sports who have spent their entire lives and will take this test and be told something that is life-altering, not just for their participation, but also publicly, socially, in terms of many countries where it's actually dangerous to be told this. Sydney, what could the consequences and the impacts be if an athlete finds out about personal information via this test, and if it then becomes public?
I mean, yeah, the idea that none of this is going to get leaked is absolutely a farce and terrifying. I mean, if you think about the type of presses that do investigative reporting into this type of stuff, like the one that comes to mind is the British press to me. And they are ruthless with what they will dig up. And they are ruthless they have very strict libel laws. So if they get things through into print, they are sure they're not going to get any legal backlash. And, it's no surprise that athletes who have been talking about this forever had their personal information leaked to the media. Reporters who, they're covering this in the mindset of, well, there's rule breaking going on. Ethically, it's newsworthy. Like sometimes I wonder, like, what I would have done if someone handed me a manila folder and said the biggest 800-meter runner in the world, like, is going to be caught up in legal drama over her status. Like, I don't know what I would do. Now, I think I would handle it very differently than I would in, 2011 when I was 20 years old. If I was an intern having that on my desk, like, what would I have done? It's horrifying to think about. These are people's livelihoods, and it's going to extend beyond sport. It's going to be, you Google someone, that's going to be in their headline. They look for employment after they're an athlete. Who knows what any employment officer is going to do with this information, being like, oh, they're a woman in name only, but also I know way too much about their medical information now. Like, that is something that just scares the daylights out of me because of it. And it's another thing that the IOC said in its information was it wants to encourage national Olympic committees and federations to test younger and younger people, so that they know early in life, so they don't get put into embarrassing, compromising situations later on. So when I read that, the headline I immediately saw was Britain weeds out 50 young imposter girls from youth sports. Never mentioning any of them, but if you're one of those people that knew it, like, that's in the back of your mind the rest of your life, that I can't be a youth athlete because my body betrayed me in a way I never expected.
Also, it's the problem with us prioritizing competition over humanity at every level of sport. And there are a lot of people whose parents have decided and whose doctors have advised at a very young age, it is not necessary to mention this. This will never impact them in any meaningful way in life. And the stigmas of it will be much more deleterious to them than having this conversation. So, this is their gender. This is how they're going to live their lives. And that's great. There is no reason to test for that on the off chance that kid someday becomes an Olympian, right? I mean, the mess that could cause. And we've talked about this on our show before, but the idea that we're placing faith in particularly male coaches or administrators at the youth level to properly handle quote unquote gender investigations is insane to me. And it also encourages what we're already seeing far too much across sport, which is the pointing and I don't think that kid's a girl. That girl's too fast. Like, Reo, the IOC's policy says, quote, unless there is reason to believe that a negative reading is an error, this will be a once in a lifetime test, end quote. Which, by the way, once in a lifetime sounds like, a trip to Disneyland with no one else there. That's not my personal high, but like that's the way you'd hear that language, not you get to take a gender test. But I'm really focused on the unless there's a reason to believe part, because throughout history, so many athletes have had their gender and appearance scrutinized by the media and the public. And some of the earliest recorded gender tests at the Olympics were due to people just saying, hey, that's a man, go look at them. Are you concerned that that clause could open up women to further testing anytime someone says they, quote, have a reason to believe the first one was inaccurate?
I think it's in both directions, right? So yes, as you say, but also let's say that you are an athlete and you suddenly learn this via this test. You might say, well, wait a minute, like I don't have an advantage. And you might want to say, because they open up for, okay, if they have one of the quote unquote rare DSDs, right, where you are conferred no advantage, right? They kind of open it up to that.
Right. It's androgen insensitive. Is that right? Where basically it rejects the ability for the androgen, the testes, the testosterone, everything to react in your body the way it would in a man. So you have the gene, it doesn't do anything. They can tell that by the specific kind of DSD, and they are allowing those people to compete.
Yes, sort of. Right. So they say, okay, if the athlete has complete androgen insensitivity, right? Or in the words of what they say is, quote, another rare XY DSD that precludes testosterone's anabolic and or performance enhancing effects. They do not give a list of what those DSDs are. DSD is a very broad category of lots of different things. And so basically what this means is that if you are an athlete and you think, well, I don't think I have an advantage, it is on you to find doctors, pay for tests, go through this whole invasive process. It's very hard to prove that you have complete androgen insensitivity. But then where's the line? Okay, 10% of my cells can respond to testosterone. Is that actually an advantage that we are going to really talk about and care about? How do we tell? It's really hard actually to pin these kinds of things down. And there will be athletes who chase that because this is their dream. This is what they've worked their whole lives for. And they're going to spend a ton of money on experts and doctors that they probably cannot afford with no support, I'm going to guess, from their, national Olympic committees and sort of teams and stuff, to try and chase this impossible sort of always moving target around, no, I should be allowed to compete.
Which is just what happened with so many of the folks in your Tested podcast who spent time and money to chase something that has now been changed. We know that the IOC will have sensitive medical data about every single woman that wants to compete. That feels very
Not
scary.
Just the
we
IOC,
also know
international federations. Every little international federation that has a podunk budget and two guys working there now is going to have this information. Sorry to interrupt, but I just I feel like that's important.
No, and in certain countries where they literally will be unsafe because there are some countries that associate being DSD with your sexuality, even though they're unrelated, with being trans, which is a completely different thing. We saw what happened to Amanda Khalif in boxing at the Olympics, people falsely accusing her of being trans because they don't understand the difference between gender testing and identity and everything else. Like, also worth noting, the guy who discovered the SRY gene, Professor Sinclair, said that these tests are really sensitive. So a man lab technician could conduct the test, accidentally contaminate it with just one skin cell, produce a false positive SRY. And if that's your one and done, don't worry, it's a once in a lifetime. That's it.
Congrats.
Like, again, to your point, now you're spending money to fight it and to argue against it. And, Sydney, there are countries that do not allow this type of testing. So the IOC has to put in their policy, don't worry, we'll bring these athletes to another country where they are allowed to do this, ignoring the fact that the country that they lived in probably had a ban on this for a very good reason. What do you make of just all the complications to the cost of it and how they're regulating who's running the tests and how accurate they are?
I mean, it really just goes to show that they are trying to fit this like round peg in a square hole because they really do believe the Olympics are this autonomous system completely on its own and deserves to be policed by themselves without governments overseeing it, essentially. It needs to be completely separate for it to work. And like you said, there needs to be 10 different and so on and legal clauses to protect themselves to do this. At some point, you have to go, is this even worth it?
Yeah. Well, I want to get back to why folks might think it's worth it. But really quickly, Reo, I know we talked last time about the Court of Arbitration for Sport actually demanded that the IOC do a study into DSD versus cis women athletes. And now they have plenty of samples, maybe not a giant study, but enough. And they haven't done it. How have they evaded that command? And why do you think, instead of being able to provide proof that being DSD is inherently a benefit, they instead are just creating rules to ban it?
This is going to sound terrible, but it's like almost impressive the way they've managed to kind of twist this idea of evidence around to say, no, we have evidence, right? Because, I come from a science background. And if you look at this from just totally science brain, blinders on for everything else, it's actually a fairly simple study, right? You take all your athletes who you say have this SRY gene, and you know that at this point for a lot of these. So the case of World Athletics, for example, in general, that's a known question.
Because they started last year with this testing. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you compare their performance with those who don't. And if your supposition here that they have this advantage holds, you should be able to see that very clearly. And World Athletics has the data to do this. They've had the data to do this for a while. They have never produced that study. And so that raises questions for me. Now, when you ask them about this, if you say, hey, like, why have you not done this? Why, again, this is a fairly trivial, frankly, study to do. They will say, oh, athlete privacy, which they suddenly care about, which hasn't been the case in the past.
Yeah.
But then they also say, and this is the bit of nefarious sort of redefining the terms and kind of constantly twisting, which is they say, oh, no. We don't need to do that study. We have plenty of evidence already because all of these women who have the SRY gene are functionally equivalent to cis men. And all we have to do is look at the data on cis men compared to cis women and say, ta-da, 13-ish%. We don't need to do the study because we are basically redefining what these words mean. Now, if you ask anybody who is an expert in the fields of intersex conditions, DSD, et cetera, they would tell you that, of course, these are not the same. These bodies are not the same.
Right.
We know that. If they were, they would just be cis. Like, this doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But it is the way they're doing it. And so they're saying, look at this giant citation list we have. All of these sources that show that the science says there is this unfair advantage, but they're not actually comparing the populations that they are then regulating.
Right. And the same goes for trans participation, because what they do is they take elite cis men and they compare them to trans women who are not the same. And in fact, so many studies are revealing that the hormones and measures taken en route to becoming a trans woman actually sometimes are a disadvantage by the time it's all said and done. And yet again, we're doing studies that are not comparing the actual thing we're regulating, which is so problematic. Sydney, you mentioned whether it's worth it. And I wonder, do you think this policy from the IOC is at its core, whether subconsciously or consciously, about preventing trans women from participating and it just happens to impact all women? Or do you think this is, with intention, a larger aim to police all women?
It's tough to say. I don't know if I could say because I'm not in the IOC. I don't want to speak for them. I think there are people with vastly different politics at different levels of this. I think there are a large people that day to day really do believe in the mission of what they're doing. And that's the mindset in which they approach this. I think the IOC at the highest levels is about protecting its brand. And it wants there to be no challenge to the idea that the Olympic Games are the greatest sporting event in the world, with the best athletes from all over the world. Now, it's not just the best athletes. They truly believe that sport should be happening in every single country at every single level, and they want to pour money into that, redistribute what they get to allow that to happen. That's why you have continental allocation spots at the Olympics. It's like the World Cup. It's not the best 48 teams in soccer going there. It's the best 48 teams weighted by continent that are going to be there. So, that's their mission. That's what they want to uphold. And I think on some level, they do believe this is probably the way to politically approach this, which is how do we distribute these resources in the most effective way and get the people that we want to be there?
Well, so that's what I want to ask you, because you mentioned political and the people we want to be there. And that's the difference here, right? Like, what does it say about the general state of the world that the IOC is introducing these policies now, going back in time, reintroducing policies that were already deemed dangerous, and doing it at a time when persecution of trans people is a political cudgel, as opposed to because of a problem that is emerging that they're trying to have an answer to? It feels, as with most trans policy, a solution looking for a problem. So that's why I ask is the intention policing trans people, because that's the conversation that is drawing attention and messing with their PR, or are we back to probably what was happening more at the turn of the century, which was like, 100 years ago, when that was just about like, we don't want women to be manly.
I think it's a mix of both. I mean, I think, you look at the athletes that were most vocal against Caster Semenya. Where were they all from? If you think about it for a few seconds, you don't want to say all global North athletes were launching this crusade, but it's curious that most of the people that were upset with the Rio 2016 final were from certain areas of the world, where the medal podiums were women who worked really hard from a different area of the world.
Yeah.
And, I think this is something that the IOC is an incredibly reactive body. I don't think they're being proactive on this. I think that's not controversial to say in any regard. I think it was not controversial to say they were being reactive in 2015 when they came up with their consensus statement, because they were being sued in human rights court at the time. And I think there was a government body that said, hey, you don't have the autonomy you think you do, and your own quasi-legal setup is, we have some jurisdiction over it, turns out. And that led to a lot of changes. And then that led to a lot of people mad about those changes, which then led to a lot of crusading and people working to get into positions in different bodies to come up with new policy, which is how politics work. Like, this is just politics. It's people trying to control who gets to go to the starting line because they want the opportunities to do so.
I want to dig down on that because it will affect policy going down to collegiate, high school, youth, probably turkey trots and fun runs.
Yeah, I mean, it affects me.
Yeah. Just everyday folks who just want to participate. And, we had Chris Mosier on to talk about the new book, Fair Game. According to that book, there are 13 times more proposed anti-trans bills than out trans athletes. That number goes up to 85 times as many bills when you're just talking about trans girls and women. This is such a tiny percentage of the population that is being targeted. And when you look at this policy and how it will get down to the way that it informs both what you mentioned earlier, let's start testing young girls at a younger age because they may one day want to go to the Olympics, to even who gets to play. I want to know where we are right now, Sydney, in America when it comes to trans participation in sport, because we've done this topic on our show many times, but with Trump's executive order, with multiple recent laws being passed, the landscape has changed significantly. So can you give us sort of a broad view of what opportunity, if there is any, looks like for trans athletes right now?
I mean, it depends on two things. It depends where you go to school, and it depends, are you an adult or are you a child? Honestly, like in some blue states, young trans athletes have no barriers to playing, whether it be on club teams or in their school teams. They can go after school and join their local track team, which was something that helped me so much in high school and helped me so much in college when I got the opportunity to keep pursuing sports and, help me as an adult. But now I am kind of, I row. Like, I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I go out on a lake when I have a chance to. Like, I don't just coach it. I go out and I race. Like, it's fun because it gives me something to do and keeps me motivated just in life and keeps going. I told my local club, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do this summer because the new policy from the USOPC basically says I have to race in what's known as an open division or in the men's division. And I have raced with 7 other women in an 8 the last 2 summers. And I can't in good conscience tell them, hey, we have to switch divisions because of me.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how good I am. Doesn't matter how many times I show up to practice, even if it's been less and less because of my own personal life. I can't say, hey, I think you should race because of me. I can say, hey.
What is the level of this competition that they have now trickled down
any
to regulate?
Masters competition.
Yeah.
Like I go to regattas all the time. I go to like 5 or 6 a year. I race against people who, like me, raced in college, are keeping to do this, some of them don't have many opportunities. So this is when they race with their club for fun. And there are others who are like me, where I track my 6K times and my 2K times trying to regain some past glory and
Right,
you know, feel
right.
like as close as I was when I was like at club nationals. But you know, it's fun because there are people that take it very seriously at lower levels in the United States across all sports. You know, you can show up and everyone's drinking beers in the parking lot after, but at the same time, like
Right.
there are, you know, I could race at a level against like people still training to be at the national team level if I wanted to. Like those opportunities exist.
That's the point of sport, is to find the part of it that brings you joy, that keeps you moving, that makes you healthy mentally and physically, that gives you a community, that gives you goals that you can reach for and try to, you know, compete at. And this, unfortunately, is going to impact folks at every single level, whether they want to show up and drink beer.
Right.
We know somebody who can't play in a beer league hockey because once USA Hockey became the regulator of all hockey and that allowed them some nice funding, they then also get to regulate who gets to participate. And I think, unfortunately, this policy is going to have way more wide-reaching impacts than anybody even knows yet.
Yeah, and I mean, like the U.S. is a case that is kind of worse off than other countries, you know, because the USOPC basically came out and said, this is going to be for all national governing bodies.
It's because Trump congratulated Kirsty Coventry on her fine job of leading the IOC.
And he basically pressured the USOPC to do it. They didn't have to do this. This isn't a law, you know?
Yeah.
It's not the law of the land, and it's not like the USOPC takes government money. We are the one National Olympic Committee around this country that is much more disentangled from our government than any other place on earth.
Yeah.
And
it's interesting, too, that the last policy from the IOC said we can't tell any federations exactly what to do. And then this policy is like, we will tell them and we are telling them. So somehow in the span of the last policy and this one, they've changed their mind about what they're capable and allowed to do when it comes to regulating the federations of other countries. It's such a mess. We're so grateful that y'all came on to help us try to sort of unpack a little bit of, I'm sure there'll be so many more conversations about this, but the goal is to keep finding trans, non-binary, DSD, athletes of every single kind and type coming together to play sports, finding joy, and taking up the space they deserve as often and as many places as they can. And the fight is just to continue allowing for that. And it's a fight at the highest level now with the IOC. Thank you both so much. We could keep talking, but unfortunately, I've kept you far too long already.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to just if I may.
Yeah.
I just feel like it is worth reading a little bit of Castor's statement about this, just because she's been in this against her will for so long and has continued to kind of carry it. So I just want to there's a longer statement that I encourage everybody to go read because I think it's actually incredibly good and very cutting, especially in regards to Coventry being a woman from Africa and Castor being a woman from Africa. So go seek that out. But I just would like to potentially read the bit, a very big bit, which is, she said, "I have carried this weight. So have other women of color who deserved better from sport. Reintroducing genetic screening is not progress. It is walking backwards. This is just exclusion with a new name." And I think that's just really spot on. And I wanted to give that context and have Castor be able to sort of at least have that piece of it.
Mic drop.
Yeah, she's so great.
Exactly right. It's just exclusion with a new name. It was testosterone. Now it's SRY. And next time we'll find something else as soon as we fight our way back to the science and the medicine, telling them this ain't it. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This is fun. I mean, as fun as one can
All
have
things considered.
on this topic. I don't know. It's tough. You gotta at least keep your head up. All the athletes I've spoken with about this have been trying to stay positive. So I'm trying to take their
I mean, the key is to try to be voices that speak out about how it's wrong, so more and more people are informed, because unfortunately the ignorance that happens in a sentence or two travels a lot quicker than the nuance of these kind of conversations.